Hello and welcome to today's Cybersecurity Summit Power Hour. My name is Rick. I will be in the background answering any WebEx technical questions. We have a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties joining the WebEx session, please submit a question using the Q&A panel. During the presentation, all participants will remain in listen-only mode. And as a reminder, this event is being recorded for rebroadcast. We'll be holding a Q&A session at the conclusion of each of today's presentations. We encourage you to submit written questions at any time during the presentation using the Q&A panel at the bottom right of your screen. Please type your questions into the text field and hit send. Please keep the drop down as all panelists. With that, we invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy today's presentation. I would now like to introduce Bradford Rand, CEO of the Cybersecurity Summit. Bradford, you have the floor.
Great. Thanks so much, Rick. And thank you, all of you, for joining us here for our West Coast edition of the Power Hour produced by the Cybersecurity Summit. We are surely looking forward to seeing all of you live in 2021. But up until that time, we're going to be producing these virtual Power Hours and the virtual Cybersecurity Summits, which will begin actually at the end of July. We've got a great lineup of experts that are going to be they're going to be covering everything from law enforcement, best practices, the latest threats, and how we can face those threats during these unpredictable times. During the course, if you decide to stay with us for the full Power Hour, you'll get a CPE certificate via email in approximately 2 days. Most of the slides and a recording of this presentation will be on cybersummitusa.com. And that is really about it. And of course, as Rick said, if you've got any questions, we certainly encourage that. Just put that in the chat box or the Q&A box, and then we will send that off to the speaker in real time after each expert finishes up their presentation. So without further delay, let's get right to it. We're going to start off with the U.S. Secret Service, David Mills. He's been with the Secret Service now for over 20 years, serving 2 vice presidents, Cheney and Biden, and now is focusing on the cybersecurity realm of the Secret Service. So let's bring David on. David, welcome to the Power Hour.
Thank you, Bradford. Glad to be here. Great opportunity for me to address your group, and especially in these challenging times. It's a privilege to be with you and be with folks in the field of cybersecurity. It's been an eventful few months here and posing new challenges, not just for you folks, but also for us in law enforcement. So hopefully we can share a little of that, commiserate, as they say here in this session. Just real quickly, here in Seattle, where I've been since 2011, we operate a task force, which was previously called the Electronic Crimes Task Force. And I think you can see the slide there. We've been since rebranded by our headquarters as a Cyber Fraud Task Force, and so we have to update our slides. But nevertheless, we are operating here in Seattle as a task force. That means that we have not just agents sitting on our task force to investigate cyber crimes, but we also have local officers of the Seattle Police Department, deputies from the King County Sheriff's Office, and other officers from other agencies throughout the Puget Sound area who are deputized as temporary federal officers. And they have the ability to investigate and prosecute federal cases. And currently, the Secret Service is operating in a dual mission status. We don't only do protection of the president, the vice president, and former presidents and visiting heads of state, but we also protect the nation's infrastructure, financial infrastructure, and we investigate white-collar crime and cybercrime. My background, as Bradford alluded to, I started actually in the Los Angeles field office in 2000, worked some advanced fee fraud back in the day with the West African scams, and then transferred to DC, worked in our headquarters division, had the privilege of working with our counterparts in Colombia, to help stop counterfeiting, which was happening at a rapid pace down there involving the drug cartels. And we were able to effectively shut down counterfeiting in the country of Colombia. It has since migrated, however, to Peru. So we nevertheless consider Project Columbia a success. Then I transferred to my presidential time, as Bradford said, with Vice Presidents Cheney and Biden. In 2011, I did come out here to Seattle, transferred to this wonderful area to start my phase 3, as we call it, background in performing cyber investigations, and I'm so glad I did that and been able to expand my reach, so to speak, into that area. So as you know, the U.S. Secret Service does investigate actively cyber crime, and not a lot of folks know that even today. We have a cyber protective mission, which envelops the protective side of the house, so to speak, in doing protection for our president and vice president, but also our other major events like the United Nations General Assembly, the Republican and Democratic National Conventions, G7, G8, and G20s, and APEC and other summits. But when it comes to cyber investigations here domestically, we focus on financial crime and our payment sector involving cards and PII, PHI, IP, and of course network intrusions. And that's been the bulk of our mission investigatively on the cyber end since we started our cyber crime task force back in the early 1990s. After 9/11, though, we were directed to expand our reach and also include academia, state and local and federal law enforcement agencies to bring a more holistic, if you will, type of environment for our investigations. We don't want to be stovepiped. That was the old way of doing things in law enforcement, especially federal law enforcement. But expanding our reach into academia, law enforcement, and partnering with state and local officials, not just in law enforcement, but in academia and the private sector, has greatly expanded our knowledge and how we need to adapt and take on new responsibilities in this realm. So now we have 40 task forces throughout the United States, strategically placed to try and serve the local communities and sectors in which we serve. So trends, I know I talked about my time 20 years ago chasing down West African fraud on the streets of Los Angeles. However, we've seen a radical shift to credit card fraud. We've seen a shift even then from point of sale fraud in the old style of credit card fraud, where a magnetic strip containing PII is compromised by a RAM scraper. We've seen that transition because we've gone, thankfully, to chip technology in our credit cards, which has changed the dynamic, the paradigm for us dramatically. I used to run out on point of sale breaches here in the Puget Sound area every week back in 2011 through 2015 when I was actively doing computer forensics and investigate network intrusions. Right now, we see this many point of sale intrusions in the Puget Sound region, and that's directly attributed to the adoption, I believe, of chip technology in our credit card payment systems. And why it took us that long, obviously, it was a business decision by all involved. Maybe it took a little too long, in my opinion, after you consider the trillions of dollars lost in fraud over the last few decades. But nevertheless, we're glad that has happened. And however, that has significantly caused our bad actors to shift to e-skimming and to e-commerce websites, obviously, and to the BEC arena, where business email compromises right now are the bulk of our investigations, ransomware attacks included. And this is obviously a great concern to folks that you work with, to your own organizations. And we can't stress enough the need for you to have a plan and plan for those types of scenarios. And that brings me into what we're facing now in our COVID environment, where the coronavirus has totally upended a lot of our daily lives. And initially, when the virus broke out in March, the Secret Service issued a warning regarding COVID scams, and I believe those have been covered before in some of the presentations, but just to reiterate, those were obviously phishing emails. They were social engineering tactics designed to steer folks to fraudulent charitable organizations to help with the COVID crisis. And then the third fraud scheme surrounded the non-delivery scams, where folks would be looking for in-demand PPE, order that online from a dubious website or a dubious ad on Facebook or on an email they received. And then the items never arrive, and they're out the money. So those things, actually, those scams have not popped up prevalently here in our region. However, obviously they have happened in other parts of the country. But one of the most devastating financial impacts of this environment, obviously, is the unemployment and how our fellow citizens have lost work. Millions of folks are unemployed currently because of the situation, the shutdowns. And right after the 2020 CARES Act was passed a few months ago, which flooded the state unemployment systems with additional cash to disperse to the unemployed, we saw the pop up of a massive amount of unemployment fraud. Here in Washington State, which we will take the crown on this one, upwards of 650 million plus was transferred fraudulently to fraudulent accounts out of the Washington State Department of Employment and Security to accounts that were linked to West African accounts overseas. This was a devastating event for folks here in Washington State who genuinely were seeking unemployment benefits. However, because of some standards that could have been better with the state of Washington, a lot of that money walked away and went to fraudulent accounts out of state. The state has since then gone back and reevaluated their system and put in additional protocols to stop the fraud. And they've been able to actually recover upwards now, I think, since this news article came out, upwards of $360 or $370 million. Again, obviously, there's a disparity there of several $100 million that still has not and probably will never be recovered. And such a devastating blow, but it's caused now since a backup in employment insurance claims. It's taking longer for folks to get their benefits, and so a big cause for concern, and something that should make us all step back and remember the importance of validation and making sure that we are providing goods and services to those who genuinely need it and who are good to go. It hasn't just happened in the realm of unemployment fraud. We still see ransomware attacks. Obviously, are a huge worry to any organization. Hospitals, government agencies aren't exempt. We've responded here locally to several municipalities in the Puget Sound area that have had their systems locked up by ransomware, and it's an extreme concern, especially when you're talking about systems that first responders and medical personnel rely upon. And so we can't stress enough for folks in the public sector as well as the private sector to be prepared to make sure they are providing backups for their data that they can rely upon, instead of trying to negotiate with a foreign actor or someone who's locked your system. And another point that I wanted to make was to obviously put in protocols for your personnel to follow, and to avoid clicking on that link, or avoid the actual social engineering that comes with a lot of these ransomware attacks, and be on alert, be on guard, and so your organization does not fall victim. Again, just the quick headlines of municipalities that have been attacked in the past by ransomware attacks. Business email, again, a scam that's so prevalent. We've seen so many spoofed emails, so many spoofed websites, that it's so hard to actually determine at times if the emails are genuine. If you can see the second bullet on this slide, my colleague's email, Tim Hunt here in our office, set this up for us to show that just a small change in a couple of letters can actually throw off an employee or someone who's in charge of millions of dollars of funds, and be responsible for infecting an entire organization. If you're going through emails in a rapid succession and you're not looking at these small differences, you may fall victim. So making sure that your employees are trained to scan and make sure that they know an legitimate email source from an illegitimate source. One of the variations that was most interesting to me, and I think I experienced a variation of it yesterday regarding our COVID situation right now, is the use of AI technology to spoof actual voices over calls. This CEO was scammed in the UK out of over $240,000 because of a fake voice, so to speak, an AI-generated voice over a phone. And this money was transferred out to a Hungarian, or out of the country. Yesterday, I was at home working and received a call on my personal cell phone from a call that the caller ID identified as the CDC Atlanta, and I picked it up, and a young lady started to speak and give me some questions for a survey, and it was hard to understand her voice initially because of an accent, but as it went on, she was going on about the additional, or the eventual advent of a COVID type vaccine. She wanted to know specifically how many people are in my household. It sounded pretty legitimate to me until she started to ask about my PII. And I asked her, why would the CDC be interested in the birth date of my 14-year-old son? And she says, well, we need to collect this data. It won't be used for anything other than for data purposes within the CDC. And obviously, I immediately threw the red flag and hung up. But it's just something that is prevalent, becoming more prevalent, obviously, in the environment we live in today. So please reach out and let folks know that this type of fraud is coming down the pike. It's ever adapting, especially as we come close to hopefully receiving a vaccine in the near future for COVID. Again, it's been my pleasure to talk to you. In closing, I wanted to reiterate it's important for you folks in the private sector to have a plan and to actually look to engage law enforcement. And when you do, make sure you have ideas in mind on what you want to accomplish. If you are victims of a cyber or a network intrusion, of phishing, ransomware, BEC, what have you, make sure those steps are worked out with your team, with your legal team, your legal representation, and then engage us. We really value our partnerships in the Secret Service with the private sector. We know that your brands, your branding, your product, your service is vitally important. It's your lifeline. It's how you conduct business. And so secrecy, confidentiality is of utmost concern for us as well. We do our best to work in liaison with the United States Attorney's Office in each of our districts to maintain that confidentiality and ultimately try to solve the crime, not just solve the crime, but make your business whole again, and try to reestablish your business and make sure that you don't become a victim again in the future. And that's one thing we've been just anecdotally talking about BECs, ransomware. We noticed that folks have been hit again. In fact, a local hospital here in the Puget Sound region was hit by ransomware recently, and they ended up negotiating a payout. And 2 months later, they received a ransomware attack for a second time. We were able to establish it was the same actor who hit them the first time through forensic evidence. And so lessons learned from that, obviously, is maybe you need to negotiate and get your data right away, but that can lead to second attacks later on in the future. Again, it's my pleasure to talk to you and address the group. And if there's anything that I could do to answer questions for you, feel free to contact me or talk about here on the forum while we're still connected. Thank you again. Thank you, Bradford, and your team.
Sure. We've got a couple of quick questions. Let's take a look. Something that you can't answer. How are you dealing with personal cell phone security for the president and vice president? I mean...
Well, I assume that question is their personal security, yeah.
Right.
That's handled, all communications on that end are handled by the White House Communications Office. And so, yeah, I can't really comment on the technicalities of that, but that's all handled by them. And they work with our protectees to provide security for their personal devices.
Okay. Here's another one. A local sheriff has a high-tech crimes unit. Is cybercrime prosecuted at the county, state, or federal level? It's a good question.
Good question, yes. It actually is prosecuted on all three levels. So the federal level, we come in most handy when it becomes an interstate or foreign-related scam, because the powers and authority of the federal government to reach out across state lines, gather subpoena and evidence, and also through the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, or MLAT process, we work with foreign governments to actually obtain evidence and process legal process through them. So cybercrime is prosecuted, yeah, local, county, and state, and through the federal systems.
And on the topic of prosecution, how successful lately are the attempts to bring in the bad actors to justice? Because there's been obviously a rampant rise in ransomware, especially during this COVID crisis. How is it coming along? Any commentary on that?
We have not had a case locally involving the successful extradition or arrest on that yet, Bradford. The last one we had here in Seattle, was actually Roman Seleznev. I'm not sure if you remember that name. He was a prolific carder, and he was extradited from the Maldives back in 2015.
Yeah.
To Seattle and tried here. I was actually the case agent on that case and did the forensics. That was our last one here, but locally, domestically throughout the country, there have been a handful. It is very difficult since a lot of these folks are in countries without extradition treaties.
Sure.
Out behind those lines of demarcation, and so it's very hard for us to reach them. However, we do have success from time to time, and that's our ultimate goal.
Okay. And we have another. Here's one from me, actually. The CDC call, where they tried to get your private information on your children and so on and so forth. Were you able, the number came up as CDC Atlanta. Were you able to research that number and try to get to the culprit?
Not yet. Since I got in this morning, I haven't been able to talk to my team yet. But I'm calling up, just so you guys know, it was a 312 area code.
Right.
Which I believe is Chicago. Is that right?
I think so.
And then it was CDC National Immune was the one on caller ID, what it came up with ID. So, and I have yet to even confirm with the CDC if they would ever collect PII, but I am almost 100% certain that they would not over the phone.
I guess they picked, they picked the wrong guy, I guess, to attack. Okay, let's see if we have any others. And how are you dealing with Apple devices? For example, Gray Key, etc. So that
We do that actively. We do Apple forensics absolutely on iPhones, Macs, and we do use Gray Key. Our agents and our TFOs, our local officers on the task force, are trained in that. I can't go into a lot of it because there's so much information that's law enforcement sensitive, but there's so many tools available for iPhones and Macs. We do target a few that are very useful to us, and they are very successful in being able to open up phones. We do still continue to work with Apple, and they're good partners. We work with them on a regular basis to serve search warrants and get iPhone backups, which are critical to getting information on suspects that we're looking at too. So we continue to work with those folks quite a bit.
I'm a huge Apple fan. However, I did disagree when they wouldn't give over the password. I think the FBI was investigating, the guy at the military base who had shot some people and so forth. I thought, hey, give up the password. Who cares?
It's a fine line. I understand their concerns, but it's a fine line between national security and privacy rights, and who's to say who has the right answer?
Exactly. All right, we have time for just one more. Let's take a look. Well, I guess pertaining to what happened to you, you had just hung up on that call after they had continued with the strange questions. What should people do with these calls? I know even my wife, I remember she had taken a call from the IRS, and they were trying to get my credit card number to give them $2,500 that I owed in back taxes, which of course was all false. And I remember arguing with my wife saying, hang up the phone. And she's yelling at me saying, you see, you didn't pay your taxes. I'm like, no, it's fraud. And I'm like, I own the Cybersecurity Summit. That's fraud.
Yeah.
So she finally hung up the phone. The question here is, what should people do? Those numbers obviously do come up, at least some of them do come up on caller ID.
Yeah.
Should they jot them down and then call their local police department? What would be the protocol when people are phone scammed?
Yeah, you're absolutely right that you shouldn't entertain the calls. But record the number, and anything else your caller ID shows, like mine shows the CDC immunization, whatever the nomenclature was, and the phone number. And you can call the local Secret Service office, talk to an agent. They can direct you to NCFTA as well to record that information, so we can keep that in a database. A lot of those numbers are related to common criminal groups out of West Africa. So if we can determine that those come from those organizations, it can aid in an investigation.
All right. Hey, David, thank you so much. Thank you for your service to our country for many, many years, 2 decades. And hopefully, when we get to the West Coast, back to Seattle and the West Coast, hopefully you'll join us as one of our speakers in a live environment.
Be happy to. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks again. Take care, David. And we're going to tee up our next speaker. And let's bring on Marcus Fowler from Bradford Trace. How are you, Marcus?
Doing well.
Okay. You ready to roll?
I am.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Marcus Fowler from Darktrace. Take it away.
Hi, very happy to be here. So Marcus Fowler, Director of Strategic Threat. Just a snapshot of my background because it probably is relevant in terms of kind of my point of view. I joined Darktrace about a year ago after 15 years at the CIA, where I was in the Directorate of Operations, focused very heavily on cyber operations against nation states, as well as more than a decade focusing on the counterterrorism threat. And prior to that, I was in the military. So that kind of gives you my optic in terms of coming to the table for cybersecurity and defense. In terms of securing the future of work, I feel like I should almost explain that because, no, I don't know what the future of work looks like. And that's kind of exactly the point. How do you secure the next thing that work looks like? And these evolutionary change we've seen some version of change or the next normal and what that's going to look like, and how do you secure that? Oops, did I go the wrong direction? Of course I did. I always do, Bradford. Okay, so how am I going to walk through this? I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what we saw, as a company, some of the actions we took and pivoted in terms of the transition to what we were watching across the industry. Some stories, everybody loves threat stories, some of the threats we saw, and then how we saw an informed, intelligent approach using that narrow application of AI, that kind of complex task savant, and how it did in terms of this level of uncertainty and this level of protection that you want and need to sustain and maintain business operations, build business resilience with a very dynamic and changing workforce that the only thing we do know it's going to continue to change. So with that, in terms of kind of showcasing what is that digital change and disruption, heightened anxiety, heightened need for information and intelligence, talking to what David said about the spikes in spear phishing, I'll hit on that as well. All at the same time of business operations moving very quickly and the priority, and then security operations, security understanding, security visibility, having to march very quickly and catch up or keep speed or try and maintain some level of speed, so that business operations are secure when business operations were the absolute priority, because if you're going to secure something, you need that business to survive, and recognizing that. I think all those factors come in. So as I'm talking about change and how AI played a role, I mean, I think if you look, just have in the back of your mind and the whole time those core building blocks of security, right, which really are visibility, investigation, and response, and how those changed, how those areas of concern that you might have had, whether it was a visibility because moved to SaaS, loss of VPN insights, investigation, more anxiety, less cycles by that security team because they're focused on other things. So how is that investigation being impacted? And then what is that response? And what is that time to response, right? When an attack is coming or when you had a vulnerability that was of concern and you wanted to ensure that you were protecting. So we were not only trying to keep speed and protect our client base, we as a company were adapting ourselves. And what were some of the things that we saw and did? So one of the first things we thought of, or what we really wanted to lean into, was how can we do more in the level of uncertainty, concern, and challenge that all of our customers were dealing with. It started with how can we do, we do a lot of healthcare, a lot of hospitals. How can we better protect these critical pieces to what's happening in our country right now, at a time when loss of their cybersecurity could translate to loss of life or loss of ability to take on all of these cases. What could we do the most quick way possible? And we very much focused on what is our proactive threat notification, which is our SOC, right? How can we be sure we're calling these people in the middle of the night with what our SOC can do, and how can we spin up and expand our SOC services so that we can meet a need if we expand it to everyone. And then when we said what was a reasonable amount of time to understand when this level of uncertainty allows those security teams that are trying to catch up to give them the time, space, and peace of mind to catch up. And it was very quickly, 90-day opt-in for that proactive threat notification, so that our 24/7 cadre of analysts that very often leveraged some of that AI in terms of that and supercharging the investigation to maintain the cycles and scalability to meet a huge spike in SOC services. How could we be there for all of those? And I'll talk a little bit about what we learned, because not only were we able to provide more security, we also got more insight into kind of threat understanding. We also very quickly looked at what are the R&D elements that we've been working on that we need to accelerate to meet the need of this change. One was with the spear phishing and our approach to email, which really is behavioral and understanding. So it is much more a not is this bad, but does this belong, and do these relationships and connections make sense? How can we make that standalone product? How can we just give it? We're not going to be able to get into data centers. Maybe we're going to, what can we get to customers or people of interest that want to improve that critical area of enhanced email security, and what will that look like? So that was one area we pivoted. The other was very quickly trying to figure out what are all the SaaS applications we need to be linking up to and integrating and have visibility into. 365, Salesforce, G Suite. What are all the ones that we know? Okta. What are all the ones that we know that are growing in importance that we need to be able to provide visibility? Because I started to get, certainly I did, that sense that we kind of had with these moving to cloud. Is there a massive loss of visibility when there's more leaning on those SaaS applications, and how can we provide that visibility? And the next one was a ton of discussion around the endpoint. Endpoints become much more critical, much more of the entry and the vulnerability. And what are we looking at in terms of integrating with existing endpoint providers? Let me get that telemetry from Carbonback. Let me get it from CrowdStrike. For somebody that doesn't have one out of the gate, but they really want some client sensors out there, what can we provide to our client base so that they have more endpoint understanding? And also, VPNs. That was probably the first health check with all of our customers that when I spoke to, are we in and seeing the right areas of your digital environment to ensure that the transition to work from home is not directly impacting the visibility provided. And it was much more about position than it was about able to keep up with the speed of change. And this speaks to that AI and the speed of change. I was personally really blown away with how the unsupervised learning maintained that level of security and that rolling real-time situational awareness that you need, even in a time of massive change. I was really surprised. You were wondering, is it going to be this massive set of spikes and alerts that are, that really are malicious, that really aren't anomalies, they're just change, being translated. But the speed with which it kept up to that transition really was impressive, right? And I think it really boiled down to the fact that it was that unsupervised learning approach, right? So that narrow application of AI in an unsupervised way, which means there weren't training and data sets that had been learned, that had been taught on, and then now you're needing it to reteach. It's designed to learn upon deployment, right? Models, classifiers, rolling and understanding your digital environment bespoke to you, and then enforcing that normal. So that to me was super powerful, right? Because we saw these security teams that now had more time to do other things because the tool suite was adapting with them, or the AI, right? And that tool visibility and investigation was actually adapting with change at that same speed, which really provided a lot of maintaining normal operations despite massive change in ensuring business resilience and business operations, right? It really, really was powerful, and I was really surprised. I mean, I broke this slide out specifically, and we actually recently redid this entire slide deck to kind of build around what we saw as the role and the performance that AI was able to do in that time of change, because we know we're only going to see more of that, right? It may not be global pandemic, but it certainly could be weather related and regional, or a cyber event that's taking place over a large scale, right? I mean, there is more disruption and change and uncertainty linked to the future of work. Emerging threats, again, David hit on this very well, as some of the other ones we saw, just the amount of, and I'll even go to one of my case studies touches on this, really not only phishing emails, but very novel, very well crafted, very of the day, going after highly anxious, highly concerned, information starved individuals who want to know, when can I go to the barber? When can I how am I going to find toilet paper? How am I going to, there's all these things that are compounded into what as I said, an attacker's paradise in terms of just the right spearfish at just the right time. Now we've seen that surge. I expect another one to come with the uncertainty and the chaos around returning to work. especially as we're seeing different speeds, different things that are opening. Now you have this, I almost don't want to say it, this possible second wave. And what does that mean? Am I supposed to go to work? Am I not? Now, again, looking for email, information starved. Again, a natural bridge and environment for attackers. The other one is bringing it back to work. What might be out there that is compromised, that isn't beaking me out yet? It's just laying in wait, right? And it's going to be brought back into that corporate environment. And hopefully you have the visibility in place to see when it does something, 100% unique to everything else around it. But if not, what are the checks and balances that are going to be there for that coming back to work? I think that's another area of great concern. Some things that we saw, I mentioned our proactive threat notification, expansion of SOC services to over 1,000. Here's the trends we saw in May. And none of them will really surprise you, though the out-of-hours attacks really got me thinking, what are in hours and what are out of hours these days, right? I know my day looks very different in terms of when I start work and when I end work, right? So, if Marcus is now logging on at 8 o'clock, what used to be bizarre now might seem, common because it's all happening within that space, that blending of, unfortunately, the work-home environment, that out of hours, what about that security team? How are they thinking about time at the terminal, right? What about getting alerts after hours? What's pushing alerts to their mobile phone, right? So that they can be that after hours, on hours, whenever it needs to be there. Increase in ransomware, no surprise there. The return on investment's massive. We won't see that. The payouts are big, especially at times of business uncertainty. They're going to be more apt to pay more quickly when there's, the business is not on stable footing, right? They don't want to deal with another impact to brand, another impact to business operations. But there is a cycle there, and David did a great job of showcasing that. Malicious file delivery, mixing it up, not just links, but also files, executables, seeing that. Increasing crypto mining, not a surprise here. We have economic instability, when you have job uncertainty, when you have maybe a spouse has lost or a partner has lost their job, your business isn't doing great right now, you're worried about your job, that crypto mining, leaning on those other avenues, insider threat, seeing some increase in that as well. These are areas that would be a natural progression. And then there's data uploads, right? Control of where and how data goes and where they need it. Are they just using, something that's approved by the company? Or if that's down, are they going outside and using whatever one they can find? One that might be that honeypot that attackers are just waiting for you to use and transfer sensitive information. In terms of case studies, talked about spear phishing. Here you have a COVID-19 spoof using a CEO's account, again, playing with some of that header information in order to make it convincing, forging the sender address, in a very way, due to recent cases of fraud, I've been asked to change direct deposit information. Here you go. Looks like it's from someone credible, certainly not an out of, a crazy request. But, Darktrace identified that it was not a known, despite it not being a known blacklist, it was missing. That would have been missed by the traditional gateway. We saw subtle anomalies. Again, not is this bad, but does this fit? Should this be here? Do these connections and interactions make sense in this way, despite the forge address and the domain spoofing and all of those things? So thinking about email differently, and I, going back to David, I think Bradford does a fantastic job of having these briefings in this power hour kind of build on the threats to the options for defense to all those other things. Definitely use cases we're seeing across the board. Unusual logins from, here a large scale Panamanian bank going after Microsoft 365, which, as I said, without a doubt, one of the areas we're seeing the heaviest need in terms of visibility and understanding. Brute force attack. We saw logins from a country outside the pattern of life, right? So over 7 days, 885 logins. 85% of those IPs were from Panamanian IP addresses. So within pattern, not unexpected. 15% were 100% unique, never before seen IP addresses being generated out of India. Looking at really an abuse of SAS and brute force, we then saw an abuse of the password reset. So all of a sudden we saw those failed logins coming from totally unknown to those failed logins coming from knowns. So obviously the attacker had success and had locked out the actual user, right? And that visibility, the ability to investigate those things and what's happened allowed them to identify there was obviously a user lockout that occurred. So the digital workforce of tomorrow and what we're seeing in the return to work and that staggered return from office, I mentioned that the malware and the vulnerabilities. Another thing I think we've also seen is kind of a circling back to previously considered hard targets within that cyberspace by the cyber criminals, right? They obviously have a target deck that's very lengthy. Those at the top might be the harder ones. Maybe they tried a number of them and they moved on in terms of their campaign. But now you have a change in their security posture for even those top ones. Then all of a sudden you saw that scaling even against what were previously considered hard targets, now being gone after much more completely in this fluid environment, in this, place where now you have more vulnerability, even for those that had everything had locked down. Now they almost had a forced hand in terms of being able to expand kind of what their vulnerability footprint looked like. Historically, an AI company might say, "Oh, traditional approaches are the ones. Traditional tools are the ones that aren't going to work." I started to really evolve my thinking to what looks like static or unintelligent tools, and not that they don't have a place or an importance, but their ability or the heavy lift it is to get them up to speed, to configure them, to tune them. Their reliance on signatures, when attackers are recycling, when they know they are reusing, when they are identifying new tools that won't be identified by a simple signature, right? And then also being able to scale. They're just, and that lack of visibility. Where is that Zoom or that Salesforce understanding for a static tool in which you really want to have a longer term relationship than that niche product for that niche piece of vulnerability that is the vulnerability of today, but might not be of tomorrow. When Darktrace often kind of we talk about the immune system approach, but I want to kind of dissect that a little bit more. And really what it is, it's about using that AI to understand normal of your digital environment and then enforce that normal to ensure business operations and business resilience, right? So in a threat agnostic approach, right? So and this really goes against the grain for me as a former Marine, former intelligence officer, right? I was very identify the threat, engage the threat, identify the threat network, identify attack vectors. But what I've seen in terms of the area of success for security for companies, for enterprises, it really is that understanding and enforcing normal, and that is everything that's yours, right? Because the level of consistency and certainty, especially with which AI can understand and enforce that normal of your digital environment, as compared to attempting to, with any consistency or certainty, predict the next attack or attack vector, it's night and day, right? That's incredibly different. I'm not saying there's not a role for threat intelligence, because that really brings a lot of richness and context in terms of what you're seeing, but in terms of preventing and stopping, trying to predict threat actor behavior is really a flawed approach, because there's going to be constantly up against a very dynamic set of individuals and teams globally that are on the attack. I talked a little bit about the platform. I'm not going to go through all the different pieces. If you're interested in Darktrace as a whole, we have a Library of Congress worth of white papers. We have, an Oscar versions of our webinars. You can see them about any specific component or the entire thing. And so I invite you to that. But that platform approach, and what we really saw in terms of the time of uncertainty, we saw companies leaning much more heavily on trusted and proven relationships and wanting to expand with them and cover where they were, rather than starting new relationships. And one of the great drivers there was our expansion of client, right, which is understanding what's happening at the endpoint. But just walking quickly around a bit of the arc here, that enterprise immune system is that unsupervised learning, kind of the core brain, in which using that visibility and that visibility investigation action. Cyber AI analyst, that's our supercharging the investigation. That's using supervised learning, so another iteration or expansion of AI in general. One of the thrusts of AI, in which we watched our own analysts over 4 years, tens of thousands of events, and now it's triaging those behind the scenes in real time, and then providing a narrated report for security teams to operate off of. And really what this means, and this speaks to my core in terms of security, because again, a decade of counterterrorism, every day I had hundreds of officers chasing down leads. The ability to have something that was already triaging potential incidents to credible threats and providing those that starting from a point of action rather than a point of investigation would be massive in terms of staff augmentation, FTE cycles, even morale, right? That alert fatigue is real, right? The skills gap is real. Really, the richness that the cyber AI analyst has played has really kind of blown me away in terms of mission enablement. And the last is an autonomous response. So having something that can respond at machine speed, disrupt the attack, then alert the security team that this has been quarantined while normal business operations have been maintained so that they can investigate and respond, right? Having that extra security blanket that's happening when you are anxious, distracted, short-staffed, dealing with another fire, knowing that's there really has played a powerful role. And I heard that from more than one customer. I heard it actually I had the opportunity to speak with a number of our kind of proactive threat notification customers. I spoke to a hospital, and the individual said, knowing that someone's going to call me in the middle of the night when I'm not paying attention, if something really bad's happening, coupled with the understanding that the autonomous response is there to stop even the most minor of anomalous or malicious anomalous behavior, that for me is allowing me to have not only peace of mind, but focus on all the other things that need to happen within this hospital to make sure it is up and running, because they, obviously we all know they could not miss a beat. It would have cost lives, right? I don't think I'm being there's not too much hyperbole there in terms of what these hospitals were dealing with in the moment, right? So leaning on AI analysts, so those few minutes they had to log into a UI, they saw narrated, they saw prioritized, they saw enriched understanding of what was happening, as well as being able to see what autonomous response was doing or had recommend doing, in which that human confirmation mode could allow them to do, even when they're running around the hospital just with their smartphone, right? Which is so critical. Being able to be secure and run that team while mobile, despite us all being at home, or many of us being at home, is important and really played an important role. So with that, Bradford, I think I'm doing all right on time. Certainly open to the Q&A. I know there's always some good questions from the Power Hour folks. So I'll get my dancing shoes on and make sure I can answer away.
Okay, we've got 46 questions for you.
With 3 or 4 parts per question?
Exactly. Here's a good one. How do we enforce BYOD security policies while also telling employees to stay at home?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that does talk about that resonating the importance of the endpoint, right? And it's also, do you have visibility into where that and how that device is logging into your infrastructure, right? Is it via the VPN, right? Are you looking within that traffic, right? Do you understand their SaaS behaviors? It really is a lot about ensuring you know that visibility. And we really are trying to see that hybrid BYOD corporate device. Where are they logging in? How are they logging in? And there is, and again, I kind of touched on this, for those static tools, there's a loss of visibility and understanding in that BYOD, especially that work from home environment.
Yep. Okay. Let's see. We have a few others here. Let's take a look. Any thoughts on quantum computing? How that's going to change the game for cybersecurity?
Sure. I mean, I do think the barrier of entry for quantum is still through the roof for cyber criminals. One thing that I really do wonder, because I think you'll see upticks in speed. I think prior to that, quantum, you will see, like, what is 5G going to do for speed of attacks? What is offensive AI going to do for unpredictable nature of attacks? Quantum is yet another point there. I do wonder, and I've been trying to look at this, nation states or others actually going after and stealing encrypted data, right? Targeting data that's already encrypted that they know they can't see today, but with quantum computing, they'll very, very, very easily be able to crack tomorrow. So, so that data encrypted at rest. So if it's stolen, it has no value. I'm constantly trying to figure out what's the right risk gain discussion there if we're talking about where quantum looks in terms of its maturity.
Okay. All right, let's see what else we have here. Interesting. Let's see. More for the Fed on that one was basically, you know, how are you addressing fake news posted by foreign governments and so forth? I don't know if you have any commentary.
Just on that, you know, I am very focused on the election in terms of what it means from a vulnerability and anxiety standpoint. You know, information, cyber attacks and cyber activity is a natural a complement to disinformation campaigns. They really work well together. I'm worried about ransomware events around the election that could cause it to be bundled into, is this a real election? How people couldn't vote, you know, disinformation, not to point the finger at the Russians, but they are incredibly good at it. They've been doing it for a very long time. Them adapting that to the cyber environment is just no surprise. So I think if, you know, for me personally, whenever I see something, you know, I research in other areas. I certainly don't pull it off of social media. I think it is a lot about vigilance and being careful of your own biases and echo chamber of information in terms of how you vet or validate the things you see, and taking a beat and reading something in its entirety before deciding to retweet or to resend, because I think that then you kind of end up becoming part of the problem. And again, I don't want to silence anyone's voice or something like that. Just know what you're forwarding and know what you're sending and its validity or lack thereof, because the disinformation, you know, those campaigns are not going away. And I think given their proven success in terms of at least manipulating discussions, I think you're going to see that. And I'm really worried about how it will be paired with cyber operations.
Gotcha. And lastly, your tips for going back to the office environment as companies reopen. Any best practices that you could suggest to our audience?
Well, I mean, my first one is you had to sprint away from that to that work from home, right? And as I mentioned, it was business operations centric, and the security team had to catch up. You do not have to sprint back to work. It can be phased, it can be organized, it can be communicated, right? You don't need to rush back in the hopes that everything will go back to how good it was prior, right? I think that it is having a very methodical approach in which, you know, security is hand, you know, in lockstep with you. The other thing is try not to forget the lessons that you hopefully learned during this time in terms of disruption, change, ability to adapt, you know, those lessons. I mean, there is a lot of power in squeezing out as much as you could from what has just occurred and evolving with it, adapting with it, and being better prepared the next time, because there will be a next time.
Definitely. Marcus, since you have ability for the chat, for people to follow up with you and Darktrace to potentially look at using your AI solutions, do you want to put a contact email for Darktrace in the chat so that all participants can see it?
Sure. Let me grab the best one I can, and I'll put it in the chat.
Terrific. We'll go ahead and do that. And I think we are just about out of time. Let me just see. Do we have one more burning question here? Let's see. How does Darktrace decide what are the R&D projects to pursue or prioritize?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, you know, I've run a number of highly technical teams, both my time in the agency and outside, and there's a tendency to want to really go after the coolest thing rather than the thing that can have the best mission impact or is the most needed by customers. And I've been very impressed with what I like to call the Darktrace tribe, kind of all the customers and the clients that we have and their interaction with each other. And it really does drive. I mentioned Okta or Slack or some of these other SaaS applications. It really gets driven off of what we hear in our tech meetups. I had a tech meetup about 100 and so a couple weeks ago. And again, this is a great, rich environment where we're hearing from our customers. I mean, I think it's kind of easy for a vendor to say, well, I have these great customer relationships, but I personally just get so much out of it. And we actually have a CXO council, which is CIOs and CISOs for a number of industries that we tap into. So it really is driven by what we see in the industry is what we hear from our customers.
Okay, terrific. Well, listen, thank you, Marcus, as always. Hopefully, we'll see you at one of our live events relatively soon, maybe in 2021. And thank you again also for your past service to our country. That you were in the CIA, you said, right?
Yep. Yeah, I did about 15. Yeah, I didn't do about. I did 15 years after I did 9 years in the military.
Wow, wow. Well, thank you again, Marcus. We'll see you at a future Power Hour at hopefully a future summit. Okay.
Whichever you want, Bradford. I always enjoy these.
Thanks. Okay. All right. Let's get our next expert up, and we have David Soto from Checkpoint, and let's get him on camera there. Hey, David, how are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Good, good. Okay. One of the last questions that just came out, I never really start with a question. We usually let the presentation go, but this just came in after Marcus left. Maybe you could address it. It says, perhaps, I'm sure, a deep fake voice is on the rise. Have you ever heard of deep fake voice?
Yes, I have.
How do you address deep fake voice when prompted to do performa voice callback verification? Any thoughts on that?
Ooh, that one's a fun one. So being a consumer myself, right? So a person who's received some of these voice calls of saying, hey, this is what we have going on. I actually personally, I use some of the actual telcos applications themselves at times. So to where it'll actually show me spam, it'll show me some of that intelligence of them. So that's one of the ways that I get some of those. Other ways that I go ahead and do it is I've seen out there, which by the way, not to steal anything, is we do actually have a mobile app. So we get a lot of this intelligence coming into, and I like to say there's a lot of big data platforms out there that are pulling all this threat intel together and sharing that intel. So it's just getting that out to those consumers to help them solve this problem, right? Because it is not a, I wish I could say that we could have an entity that provided security for everybody equally. We just don't have that today.
Yeah, and once we come up with that solution, usually about a week or two later, the cyber criminals will kind of do a workaround, which now leads us to your presentation. And I really love the title. How many security products do I need? It's wonderful. So let's give the floor to you. Thank you so much for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you. So yeah, so I'll give you a little bit of my background. I actually come at this from a different perspective. So seems like all of us are prior military. So I'm prior Air Force, and I also worked at an MSP. I've also worked at a bar. I've worked at customer sites. I've been a CISO myself. So I have a different viewpoint than probably a lot of the different people here. And so this is how I see it. And these are some of the problems that I ended up having. I'm going to talk about the current attack surface of what we're seeing in the market today. What are some of the issues, some of the CISO challenges, some of the vendor landscape, and then survey results that we actually did out there, right? And talk about those. So, and then talk about some demystifying of the consolidation, and then a little bit about our view, just because, of course, have to give our view at the end, right? So some of the things to notice is the attack surfaces are changing, right? There's the widening. Now we're working from home. We used to work from Starbucks. They're starting to open back up. Also, we're now doing this in the cloud. We're also now doing serverless. We're using BYOD. We're using all these different technologies to enable our business to go faster. And that's a good thing. And then with that, though, that means the threats are increasing. That means the attack surface is bigger and the threat is going to be even bigger. And then the budgets, of course, this is something I like to say, budget's always shrinking, but the budget is changing. We're changing from a CapEx model to an OpEx model. It's just naturally what's going to happen in the environment with customers, with ourselves, just how things are. And I don't know if you guys can see this, but in relation to how many products do you have in your environment? Now, I like to say I include forensics products in that list. So for me, I have over, I remember at a company I worked for, I had over 30 to 40 different products. A lot of companies I go walk into and I call them my friends. I go and I talk to my CISO friends and I'm like, hey buddy, how many are you dealing with? And he's like, well, I have this vendor, this vendor, this vendor. I need to have 5 endpoint solutions just on my endpoint, plus not to say I'm not doing anything on the mobile yet, and it's on my list of things to do, right? And so these are all things that we all know. In fact, this is a known problem, right? And if you look at my background, I came from Optiv. It's one of my VARs that I worked at one point. We had literally, I believe, almost every one of these vendors on our line card that we could help you with, I'd like to say. And tell me this is not the truth. You don't know, you probably know most of these. I think, Dark Trace, you're on here, buddy, just saying. Everybody's on here. I think there's a few of the new guys are not on here just because this is maybe a year old, but this is true. So we did a survey and we were like, you know what? Based on what we're seeing, this can't be just us saying this. So we did a survey of like over 400 different companies, and we did C-level, and we said, hey, do you believe this is increasing in complexity? How many people do you believe it has increased? And is there hype? Are we off? And the truth is, yeah, in the past 3 years, cyber threats have increased, and the complexity has increased. But with that, we've increased the amount of vendors that we have, which means we have more defensive control vendors. We have more vulnerability management vendors. I can name at least 5 to 10 different vulnerability management vendors. Then we have policy and process vendors, right? We have incident response vendors. Now, I consider threat analysis, big data, I consider SIM, all those incident response, as well as forensics. So it just grows even more. And then because there's so much complexity, we can't even deal with how many things we need to do, so we bring in managed service providers. Now, what managed service providers do is they take and they say, okay, we're going to do up to this point, and then you need to help us with the rest, because the rest is the difference. Now, I was a CISO at an MSP. I can tell you there's only a certain amount that they can do because, it requires a deep knowledge of your environment. So how many do we end up with, right? And so based on that, we saw, and this was off the poll, you notice here, 3% were at like over 40 vendors. 2 to 5 vendors was 49%. Now, I believe that this is more of the small, the mid-enterprise, was probably the lower end, and the larger start to get into the bigger. Why? Because they can afford more, so they end up trying to do the best of breed, and they end up with the larger amount. Tell me if you guys are not seeing anything different. I know for me, this is the norm, right? And this is what I'm seeing, and even more so, right? And I put up here, it's confused. There's too many choices. And also, it's how many vendors you know that are, how would I call it, feature vendors. All they do is one component of what you need out of your security control. Like, for example, a tool that only does encryption on the endpoint. Doesn't even do encryption in your database. It doesn't even do, so those are individual pieces, right? An EDR tool that only does EDR. No, I want you to do more. The only way we're going to do, this is an old Air Force model, is the only way we're going to do more with less is if we have less to do it with. We have to learn how to use those tools more effectively. Then, if I go with a vendor, here's one of those things of demystifying, right? If I go with one vendor, am I at risk if I have multiple vendors? No. So if I get one vendor, will it catch the malware? A platform vendor does not have a complete solution in any one area. Consolidating with one vendor does not mean the solution will function as one solution, right? So with this, you start glowing about it, you start looking, and it's all false. These are all, I used to deal with this at my prior job, and we used to actually walk in, and I had so many customers who would come in and say, hey, what about, let's do a tools rationalization. So we literally took a map of every tool they had, the list of controls that they need to protect about for their organization and their size, and we said, based on this, you could remove these 10 to 20 vendors and reduce to this exact set of vendors, right? And that worked. So these are things that we're already seeing that companies are already headed to, and truthfully, it's true, and it works, right? And So, I hit home button. Okay. So also, how the other issue we run into, how are we connecting all these solutions to work as one? You know, how are we doing API integrations? How are we doing with scripts, right? How are we doing with SOAR platforms to try and integrate them? There's so many different ways. I actually, to give you guys an idea, my own son has gotten into cybersecurity. His full-time job is to do API integrations and to go ahead and help for cybersecurity and to do scripting. So when I'm talking to security professionals, I call them security professionals even though they're in college, I start talking about, hey guys, can we go ahead and do these integrations? And the only way for us to do that is for you guys to go ahead and start learning Perl, learning all those different ways to integrate and do that in the cloud and do that natively. And then when you are looking for a new company, they'll help you. So also, here's a question for the group. How many endpoint solutions do you have? Think about it. Do they work together? Do they take, for example, a malware defined, do you have to send it to your SIM and then from there you can do an action with your EDR, or does it go directly from one into the other, right? How do they work together? Do they integrate seamlessly into your incident response process, right? Do they have an automation out of the box or some way that they can do? And do they build into or integrate into your cloud infrastructure? I can tell you right now, from my experience being at Optiv, all these are all questions that our customers are going, no, I am having issues with going into my cloud infrastructure. And then how are they validating that it's happening? We were building big data solutions to be able to validate that the controls were working and validate that and produce metrics that actually showed that the simple question of, am I secure? So these are all top of mind questions and problems that I can say my friends, CISOs, are having and issuing, right? And so this is top of mind is how are we connecting these solutions? So this is where I know this is going to be a little bit more in around how are we looking at solving this problem or helping you with this, right? Some of the things that we're looking for is in a world of a CISO, these are the top of mind things. You'll notice I'm not saying it's not, I'm saying it is. This is the NIST model. If you really looked at it, we need to identify our potential threats. We need to develop and implement the right protections, the right controls, which is implement, right? Detect. We need to detect when these incidents occur, and we need to be able to respond, and we need to be able to recover. I'm sure everybody on this call all agree that these, if you can do this, you have a potential to actually enable your business to be secure, right? And so what's needed to get to there? It's to build a strategy around this. And the way that I like to say it is, it's building a holistic solution with defense in depth, with prevention first. I know you hear a lot of, hey, I just want to detect that it happened because I don't want to stop the business. But what if I told you we can detect when it happens and prevent the most of it and then go to there? Then the next is to build in automation, right? Have a strategy to build around that. Build it in an agile and enablement manner, which means I'm enabling the business to move forward and to move forward at the speed they need to, which means, think about it. What is security? Security is the seatbelt inside the car. We are there to protect the occupant or protect the business as it goes at the speed it needs to go. We need to provide that visibility and control, and we need to improve the TCO across the board. If we're not helping with giving them the right budget that needs to be, because I remember this is something I used to go through quite a bit, is you need to have just enough controls to meet the risk level that you're trying to protect. Does that make sense for everybody? I know it's questions and answers will be next. So real quick, this is the solution that we've put together here at Checkpoint. I know this is the commercial side, right? This is where you see and you go and your eyes glaze over a little bit. If you notice, we've taken this and put this into those different components for our customers to enable them to have prevention first. And now, from a lot of you in the past, I could probably ask you, and you probably will say, I can tell you what your answer will be. I say, what do you know Checkpoint has? You'll say, oh, they're the firewall guys. Well, yeah, that's that network component that you see down there at the bottom left. There are ways that we can protect against those phishing attacks that we saw in the previous slides from the previous guys, right? We can protect it not only at the mobile, we can protect it at the endpoint, we can protect it in the cloud. So there are ways to put in preventions in place. There are ways that we can do anti-ransomware. There are ways to do this. It's just we need to shift that dynamic and start looking at, are there vendors that can do this holistically across my environment? So this is the commercial side, right? So moving on, one of the ways that we like to think about it is we like to look at, let's create a budget for you to enable you to move this forward. And I'm going to go quickly past this because this is how we build the way to enable you to have a consumption model for your enterprise. And so this is where I look at having that capability for the customer to be able to see and have defenses and protections and controls around what is in the cloud, what is in the data center, what is in your office, your endpoint, your mobile, IoT. You need to protect the person where they are. So if I start to look at what we've done, we've built a way for you to have a zero trust environment or a way to get towards that with building those protections about no matter where the person is, give them the defense and depth that they need across their enterprise. So little long way to get there. I know I went a little bit quick, but I wanted to make sure that I left enough time for questions. And let's see here, make sure correctly. That's it in relation to there. I left up there. It's actually, you can click on it and it'll pull up my LinkedIn if you want, and we can actually have a conversation.
Hey, David.
Yes, sir.
You got a question here. Let me just decline. I don't understand why that's coming in. Have you had any severe attacks? Have you seen any severe attacks based on Qbot? I know people who have been attacked by this, and if attendees aren't aware of the malware, it uses actual email conversations and communicates with your contacts. Have you dealt with that at all?
Actually, our research team has done some research on things like this, and hence why we have seen some of that, yes. And we've looked at ways to do that within our threat cloud on how to push those protections down to the mobile and the endpoint.
Gotcha. And what is the best way for people to follow up with you, David? Should that be your email, or is there someone else on your team that we can share with the participants?
So probably the best way, if you have a question for me specifically, you can follow up with me. However, we do have a team, and I'll go ahead and we'll post into the chat an email address for everybody to be able to contact us.
Okay, excellent. Let's just see if we have any others here. I know we're running a little bit behind, and we already answered the deepfake voice question. With regards to getting back to work, I mean, any specific best practices that you would suggest at this point?
Yeah, actually, so strangely enough, so I run a CISO roundtable here in Orange County, and so I have a whole bunch of CISOs that we all talk, and this was actually a topic of conversation in my last roundtable.
Right.
So some of the top of mind things that we were looking at was how do we not only enable our employees to come back, but come back and feel safe, right? To make sure that they are not having to worry about, is the guy next to me sick? And also privacy concerns around who else could potentially have it, right? With some of the new apps on the phones, et cetera. So one of the things that some of the CISOs were talking about doing was around putting in flare cameras or using cameras to detect people who actually are having fevers or having a high temperature. So that was something that we came up. Another thing that we were talking about was the privacy concerns around that data about who you've been in contact with, and making sure that we've addressed that not only with the legal departments and also HR, et cetera, on, hey, this person's been infected, that is HIPAA. We need to make sure that we're making appropriate classifications and modifications of that data, right? So those are all top of mind concerns in relation to going back and enabling the workforce. Another thing that has come up, and we've seen this across, I've started to hear this from a lot of CISOs, is some companies are talking about not going back traditionally to the office.
Right.
So exec staff work from home permanently.
That was Twitter when Jack Dorsey said that.
Yeah, I actually have that healthcare here in Orange County has said that to me. They're like, Dave, I'm not going back to the office ever again. I'm like, awesome. I'm like, that works.
That's not good for the commercial real estate market, right?
No, I think that's going to be one of the outcomes we're probably going to see. The commercial real estate market is going to have a little bit of a deflation, maybe. We'll see.
I think a big shrinkage. Even my office, we may be going into a smaller office as well, because we just don't need everyone there at the same time. So,
yeah,
that's for sure. Hey, David, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to get to our next speaker. I just shot you an email or a text over the chat. If you'd like to share your contact information or a follow-up email for any of the 200 plus executives on there to follow up with Checkpoint, just share it in the chat box. Okay.
Thank you very much.
You got it, David. We'll see you soon. All right. I'm going to bring up our final speaker for today, Department of Homeland Security's cyber division, which is called CISA, and Ron Watters is going to discuss a little bit of everything. Most importantly, many of the free tools that basically taxpayer money has already funded, you could utilize at your enterprise and test your environment from a penetration aspect and many others. We'll let Ron take over. Ron, can you hear me? Hey, Ron, are you there?
Bradford, can you hear me?
Now I can hear you. Okay.
Okay, great.
All right.
I think you were unmuting me as I was unmuting me, which muted me.
I got a little scared, and I was like, okay, I guess I have to go through these slides myself. All right.
No, I'm here.
Take it over, Ron. And
thank you. Hey,
take us home. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to today's Cybersecurity Summit, Power Hour. I'm Ron Watters. I'm the Cybersecurity Advisor to the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency of the Department of Homeland Security for Region 10, which is Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. Also, in participating on today's summit is Barrett Adam Simmons, who is our Regional Sector Outreach Coordinator and is a godsend to me when it comes to information and exercises. Also, is Janine Gilbo, the Cybersecurity Advisor for Region 9, which is which is California, Hawaii, Oregon, not Oregon, California, Hawaii, Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico. So she's also on the call. Well, she's not presenting. She's on the participants list. So everything I talk about today, if you're in those areas, she can provide for you. And she's absolutely brilliant and does an excellent job. So let's get started, because I know we're limited on time and you're all looking forward to lunch. Okay, let's see here. Let's see if I can do this. Whoops. Okay, what I did was went to small screen, which was not what I wanted to do. Okay, well, let's talk about critical infrastructure sectors. Under Presidential Policy Directive 41, the Department of Homeland Security was assigned 16 critical infrastructure sectors to oversee cybersecurity information. Those sectors include everything from telecommunications and IT to government businesses, dams, energy sectors, transportation. As you see here by the slide, if I can get this back to full screen, if somebody can help me here, wait, yeah, I can do it. There it is. You'll see we have a wide variety of things to cover. So we're responsible primarily not for law enforcement, but for cyber resilience and recovery. So when we talk about resilience, we're talking about the ability to prepare for and adapt to changing conditions and withstand and recover rapidly from disruptions. We're here to help you become resilient, to not be the low-hanging fruit, to stay away from malware and things as much as you possibly can, be prepared to recover should you be hit with a ransomware things along those lines. Cybersecurity Advisor program, which is what I'm part of, covers a variety of things. We come out and do assessments. As Bradford mentioned earlier, these assessments are absolutely free, no cost to you whatsoever. And I have a list of those at the end of the presentation, and we'll talk a little bit about those at the end. I encourage best practices. We'll talk about what you can do to not be that low-hanging fruit. We develop capacity and support cyber communities of interest. We try to educate if you need help with your employees. Remember, your employees are both your strongest resource and your weakest link. So let's make them more cyber aware. And as we get more cyber aware, the incidences of malware or ransomware hopefully will go down. I take it back and listen to your requirements. What do you need? What can we do for you? How can we help you out? And coordinate bringing those things together. I want to make sure that if you need an exercise, I put you in charge with Barry and her team to help you facilitate that exercise. If you need an assessment, I'm here to help you with that. If it's an assessment that I don't directly provide, I put you in touch with Citizen Central, who can provide those assessments. Just to give you an idea of our deployment, here are the regional breakdowns. As you see, I'm in Seattle. I'm the regional cybersecurity advisor for Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. We have a district advisor in Portland. That's Teresa Massey. And then, as I said, Janine, who's a participant today, she's in Region 9, which is Hawaii, California, Nevada, and Arizona. All the services are across the board. If you're outside of those two regions, are the same. So we can all of us can provide those for you. So let's talk a little bit as we come back off of COVID. When we come back off of civil disruption and we start to return to some normalcy, let's think about some things that we should be considering within our enterprise as we come back to full operation. How do you measure your cybersecurity efforts going well? Now, I joke often when I do these presentations in public. Do you go into the cyberspace and go to Bob, the cyber guy, and go, "How are we doing?" He gives you a thumbs up while he drinks his Red Bull and says, "Hey, we're good." How do you know? The fact that you haven't been hacked or you haven't received ransomware, does that mean that your cyber security systems are in place and that you're functioning properly, or are you just lucky? You need to know. You need to know how you are doing. Do you have cybersecurity activities? Okay. Have you done an exercise? Have you done a tabletop? Do you take your incident response plan and review it annually? Do you have an incident response plan? If you have an incident response plan, do you know where it's located and what it says? Does it assign personnel responsibilities? If you're in the incident response plan with assigned responsibilities, you know what they are. Oh, come on, what's going on? Okay. You hear the cybersecurity standards of practice. Are you following NIST? Are you following IEEE 27000? Are you following the cybersecurity framework? What's your standards of practice? Or is it just Bob, your cyber guy, telling you what to do? And believe me, that's more common than you would think. There's a lot of Bobs out there, and they're making rules that don't make any sense to anybody but Bob. If you are following a cybersecurity standards of practice, are you accredited? Do you have PCI accreditation? Do you need to renew that? Are you being audited? Are you doing Sarbanes-Oxley audits, or what's commonly called SOX audits? Do you have some regulatory environment around you that says you have to do certain things? And are you doing those things? Who's responsible and accountable for cybersecurity? The actual true answer to that question is everyone is. But there's going to be a guy or guys or ladies who are responsible and are going to take the fall if your cybersecurity failed. If your large corporation ends up getting a ransomware and you lose billions of dollars, somebody's heads are going to roll. Probably the CISO, probably the COO, maybe the CEO. If you're a mom and pop business and you get ransomware, yeah, there's really not many heads there to roll. It's going to be mom and pop, and they may go out of business. What's at risk? Have you done a risk analysis? Do you understand what's at stake? Are you looking at your systems and saying, hey, we really shouldn't be doing that? Remember, there are 3 phases to risk. You can accept the risk. Yeah, we know it's there, and we're okay with that. You can mitigate the risk. Yes, we're aware of the risk, and we're doing everything we can to mitigate that risk. Or you can transfer the risk. You take that risk and you buy an insurance policy, and then that insurance company takes the responsibility of that risk in case you are hacked, in case your data becomes corrupted. They'll be there to help you respond and get back what you need. Have you planned for cyber incident management? Earlier we talked about, incident response plans. Have you had a tabletop? Have you gone out there and taken a look at your systems? Do you have full and complete inventory of those systems? Do you know what they are and where they are? Do you have a way to detect if people plug unauthorized systems into your network? Have you exercised your plan? It's great to have a plan, but if you don't know if it works, what good is it? And if you do exercise and find gaps, did you update the plan? Can you sustain operations of critical processes following a significant cyber incident? So if you were hacked today, could you isolate that system and still maintain critical operations? Do you have a coup? Can you go to another operating site and maintain full operations? These are all things to consider. Now we talk about free resources. Here's a list of the resources provided by CISA. They include remote penetration testing. We have cyber hygiene, which we will probe your perimeter router and tell you how deep we can get to your system, tell you if your router is configured properly, give you a report. We can do that periodically, so we can do it weekly, monthly, semi-annually, however you want to do it. We have phishing campaign assessment. We can fish employees and see if anybody is actually falling for the phishing campaign and give you a report, the percentage of the people that were involved. I provide 3 direct assessments where I come out to your site. The Cyber Resilience Review is a large assessment covering 10 domains to include asset management, risk management, vulnerability management, training, and at the end of these assessments, you'll get a report, and then we can sit and talk about the report and identify your gaps and do some gap analysis and see what you want to do from that point. We also do the infrastructure survey tool, which takes a look at a more technical side of the cyber resilience review, and then we have the external dependencies management assessment, which looks at everything you don't normally think about. From a system point of view, you're looking at your network, but are you really thinking about the things outside? Are you thinking about your HVAC vendor who may have a persistent connection to your network? Are you thinking about other vendors who come into your network to do routine maintenance? Or contractors, are they accessing your network from outside the workplace? Things that you don't normally think about, you should probably be thinking about on a regular basis, because that's where some of our cyber threats come from the outside. Also, we provide exercise assistance. If you decide you want to exercise your incident response plan, we can do that. We have technical publications. If you're a member of the state, local, territorial, and tribal government sector, we facilitate the MSISAC, which is information sharing, and they also have Albert sensors. Talked about sensors earlier in the day. They can help with incoming detection, intrusion prevention, intrusion detection. At this point, I think that's all for me. Here is my my information. Please feel free to reach out. Remember, everything that we offer here is absolutely free. And that's all I have, Bradford.
All right, great. Thank you so much for that for joining us. I just went outside to see a gorgeous day. Thank you for speaking, Ron. And in the case of a breach, when would be the best time to call CISA or DHA? Or should they call their local FBI or Secret Service agency?
Yes. The important part here is that somebody's notified, whether it be me or CISA Central, which used to be known as the NKIC, or the FBI or local law enforcement. Notify somebody. What we like to say, if it's a critical infrastructure partner, we should notify CISA. CISA has a FBI liaison in the watch desk, so if it crosses over to critical or criminal, then the FBI also is notified. The ISAC, or one of the various critical infrastructure ISACs, also has connection with the CISA watch desk, and they coordinate. If it's financial crime, you would probably contact the Secret Service. Depends on what it is. It's good to reach out and contact somebody to get some assistance. If you have insurance, contact the insurance provider. Then your insurance provider can contact the FBI and coordinate incident response.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Ron. Thank you for your service to our country. As most of the executives have asked about the slides, we're certainly going to share your slides on Cyber Summit USA, and do appreciate you joining us. Hopefully, we'll see you at one of our real cybersecurity conferences in person.
Yeah, it's a little awkward for me to be doing this from home. I like to be on stage and get a feel for the audience, but now it's just me talking to myself.
In the live events business, which we're in, we certainly miss it. So we hope to see everyone in 2021. Thanks again, Ron, and you guys are doing a great job over there at CISA.
Thank you. Appreciate it. You have a good day.
You got it. You take care. And thank you all for joining us. For those people that are still on, there's over 200 executives still with us. There's the contact information for follow-up. We're going to put that up on Cyber Summit USA as well. And you guys should be all set with all the information there. Again, we are going to be producing the Cybersecurity Summits virtually starting in late July, and then hopefully in 2021, we will be back at hotels around the country. Again, thank you for joining us. Stay safe, stay secure, and we will see you at the next Power Hour. Take care. Bye-bye.
We created IoT Nation to help professionals like you navigate the IoT space, to find the companies, people, use cases, and events that are most relevant for you. On IoT Nation, you can browse over 25,000 IoT-related companies and dive into the details for specific ones. You can also search geographically, zoom into any area of the map, and explore companies in any city. You can find applications in various verticals, such as smart buildings, smart cities, connected mobility, and many more. And you can plan your week and month ahead by searching dozens of online and offline events to find the ones that are most relevant for you. For all Cyber Summit Power Hour attendees, we are offering free use of IoT Nation Pro for 30 days with the code CYBER2020V. If you have any questions, contact us at info@iotnation.com.